decided on this when Hesse and I recently got into an intense conversation about about the ethics of generative AI. Which started, it was really got intense, and then it turned into a discussion: should we even use it, not use it? And it's not as clear cut as one would think, because I was very much like determined, like I had some very strong opinions, and Hesse did too. So we said, okay, this requires more nuance. There are more sides to this conversation. So we'll start off today with two experts that we invited. I will start with you, Bhaskar, just because you're too much. And we'll start with the closest. I would love for you to introduce yourself, just a brief intro, and please let our audience know whether you'll be arguing for or against generative AI. For is Hesse and against is me. So who are you going to be debating on the side of?
Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here and see all of you. I'm Bhaskar Mitra. I'm an information retrieval researcher based in Montreal, Canada. My background is in information retrieval, but in that context, I've also been working a lot around machine learning. And in the last 5 to 6 years, I've also been looking at the societal impact of these technologies. I spent about almost a couple of decades in big tech, and then very recently, I made a decision to step away from big tech for a multitude of reasons. And so in that background, as you might guess, I am going to be speaking on the side of against the use of LLM on Mia's side. But I'm also looking forward to hearing from Hesse and Beatrice today.
Fantastic. Glad to have you on my side. Beatrice, please introduce yourself.
That is, I'm going to be in the positive side, always positive thinking the best of people. So I'm going to be for the use of Gen AI. My name is Beatrice Gonzalez Majides. I go by B, like the animal or the letter. And I am a disabled foreign mom of 2 small children living and working in Cologne, Germany. I lead accessibility and digital inclusion for Central Europe at a global IT company with headquarters in Paris. And I have a quite technical background. I am in consulting, user experience, and front-end development. And yeah, I'm going to take all the technical knowledge as a positive way of using a new tool for good. So I'm going to be Hesse's side.
Oh, okay, amazing. We're so excited to have you. Cannot wait to hear your perspective. And now over to my brilliant colleague and friend and my partner in all things making good trouble, Hesse Jones from north of the border. Hesse.
Hi, thanks, Mia. So I'm Hesse Jones. I work with Mia at Women in AI Ethics. And when we were having this debate, I was specifically looking at generative AI from the perspective of me as a writer. And I realize all the bad that's gone on to this technology. But I also have seen the glimmer of hope of what can happen when you put some of these technologies together. And I think this will be a fun discussion.
I am so excited, cannot wait. Again, for those of you who missed it, this is our very first debate. And what are the reasons you would use generative AI? So over to you, Hesse, Beatrice.
Why don't I start off by saying that I am totally understanding and open to what these types of technologies have done. We've seen it with social media, etc. But I always say, and I always believe, that there is always a silver lining, that the road to hell sometimes is paved with good intentions. In this case, it could be the opposite. But I would say that even as a writer, I have always done everything from scratch, my own research, my own ideation, my own validation of topics and also facts. What I had recently done, I wouldn't say recently, maybe a couple of years ago, was actually experimented when ChatGPT came about. And the one thing I found right away was it helped me manage my time better, especially when it came to transcripts. Transcripts, as you know, are not perfect. And so trying to export a transcript and making heads or tails because there's so many ums and ahs, there's always problems with some of the outputs of these transcripts. I needed to clean it up. It took the technology less than 5 minutes to be able to clean it up for me. And that saved me so much time. And, from that perspective, I realized there are other things that I could probably leverage from the technology that would help me save time. Now, I have to say, I did go to the dark side. I did end up generating articles, and that presented a whole host of other issues I can get into later. But for the most part, there are journalists out there that do it. And I would say that it can be very beneficial from a time savings perspective. But I think the other thing to consider is that could you do something infinitely, I wouldn't say infinitely, but maybe even 10-15% better without the technology? And that's one area I do want to tell people about. There are significant benefits if you do try the technology. I'm going to leave it to Beatrice, and we can go from there.
Thank you, Hesi. So leveraging what you just mentioned about better productivity and better support for your creativity, I'm going to put another lens on it. So I'm going to talk from the ethical and the legal side of Gen AI as an enabler for neurodivergent folks, and how to empower also folks with physical disabilities, because the example you gave with the transcript is a great example of how hard of hearing or deaf people could participate better in society, but using the same technology, being in a meeting with friends, with family, or in a work setup. We have to think about large language models and language processing tools that can provide summaries. So one of the things that I use almost every day, I have a lot of meetings back to back. We were mentioning about back-to-back meetings, how we don't finish one meeting and we go into the next one. We don't have time to summarize and do notes. So we can just ask, please make a summary, please do the takeaways. And when I am having conversations, so I work in multi-language, and sometimes some colleagues in Germany, they talk about very legal terms, and then we talk about some compliance issues, and they use very high legal German terms. And I get to a point where they talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And I ask the Gen AI in the background, okay, what does my colleague really want from me? So it tells me, it wants this and this. And I read out loud, okay, is this what you want from me? Oh, yes, exactly, that is what I want. And then the meeting is over and I can go back to do the next things that I have to do. So for me, it's a way of, having also less bad feelings about me missing out on something. So if something happens and I get distracted, I can ask, okay, what did I miss? Or if I arrive late because I was sharing screen, all these things make me feel more professional. I am the same professional, but it takes away imposter syndrome that is related to my disabilities. And for example, if I am a blind person, I could say, an AI designer, please take these bullets and make a pretty presentation for me. I could take an inaccessible document and turn it into something my screen reader could read. So it will read, analyze the text and the content, and it will do a description for me. So I don't have to ask for permission. I don't need to ask the colleague to do all the work for me, because it takes time to create accessible documents, right? I could also use LiDAR and image recognition for wayfinding. I can use my phone and I don't need to ask for permission or ask if there's a roadworks or something. I can find my way being independent. And there's a lot more examples, but I'd like to give the ball back to you, Hesi.
Okay. Mia, before you go, can I just say, address something that I forgot to address before, especially on the legal aspect and the ethical aspect, because it's almost a come to Jesus meeting with Forbes, because I write for Forbes, and they were concerned about their writers' use of generative AI. And at the end of the day, they had said, we want you to tell us what you're using it for, but also be transparent about when you're using generative AI. Like, the biggest thing for writers and for publishers is that this is a human voice, and it's your voice. There's a reason why you were chosen to write. And you have to experiment responsibly, and you have to understand that technology isn't always tested. And so from that perspective, they had said, always make sure it is your voice, and that if you're bringing anything to the table, all your facts, etc., that is always validated.
The use cases you mentioned are so powerful. that I can't even argue against them. But I love how Hesse is also leaning more towards in favor of. She's giving all the arguments. I'm like, I'm putting some of your in your own voice into my bucket of like sorry, against. It is not in your own voice. But that said, I do want to just lead the conversation again back to the ethics and talk about how, for me, the main issues are the way these models are developed. So that's where my ethical issues, my concerns start, like how it's the training data that's being used, which is lack of consent, and the fact that the creators of this data owners are not compensated. And also there's this application, which is in plagiarism and deepfakes. So those are my concerns, and I will hand it over to Bhaskar. Let's talk about sticking to ethics and legal implications. Like, what are your concerns and why are you against the use of generative AI?
Thanks so much, Mia, and thanks so much, Hesse and Beatrice. I think, Mia, you actually did a really good job of kind of setting the stage or a segue for me where I was going to take this with, which is I actually want to start by saying that personally, I feel strongly that this discussion needs a pretty strong kind of like, nuance in the frames in which we try to explore these answers. There is obviously, like, we can talk about the advantages and risks of the technology itself, but I think a lot of the objection to these technologies, and this is very much true for me, is actually coming from looking at the broader socio-political context that we are living in today in the world and the role that technology is playing in that, right? So, for example, like, when I'm thinking about these technologies for, like, for writing or for other kind of knowledge work, what it does align with is, like, Silicon Valley has been running for decades long kind of this project of like gigification of work and basically creating the conditions under which we can renegotiate down the cost of labor and disempower the workforce. And now we are looking at these technologies that are built on misappropriated data of people and then used, and then the model is finally being applied to directly commodify the jobs of exactly those people whose labor it has appropriated. We are also seeing people talk about using these technologies to help with, like, the scarcity of healthcare professionals and therapists and teachers. And again, in those cases, I think it's really important to look at the politics of these technologies and the narrative and how these are providing political cover for further defunding of our social services, including health and education. And in fact, to be honest, like, it actually feels like the response we are getting from the powers to be about the real needs of our community is to say, let them eat chatbots. And last but not the least, I think, again, we are living in a time when we are seeing an incredible rise in authoritarianism across the globe. And I think this is, again, another one of the points where we need to think about where these technologies connect. I'm specifically, like, really concerned with, and now that we have all of these conversational search technologies and these models that not only just, like, retrieve documents, but present information in particular way, I'm really concerned about the treasure trove of information that these institutions now have from online surveillance, combined with the ability of these models to generate very persuasive language and imageries to effectively build kind of an infrastructure for mass manipulation, right? We are already seeing reports of people talking about the new age of digital blackface, where you can have ads or, like, videos with, like, a character or an avatar who might be taking on co-opting the identity of Black or other marginalized people and talking and doing things or acting in ways that might be completely contradictory to those communities' traditions and beliefs. So I just want to wrap up saying there is that I think the way I really want to think about this is not just individually whether we should use this technology or not, but collectively as a society, how do we meet this moment, right? How do we take back power through strategic boycotts? And if the LLMs or these large vision models are actually kind of the new the picket line, digital picket line, then how do we also do this in a way of creating a movement and practicing politics of care and empathy, where we do try to reconcile the collective risks with the individual circumstances, some of which Beatrice and Hesse has already brought up. Because the thing that I strongly believe we cannot let happen is tech Silicon Valley being able to pry open those cracks in the solidarity and just coming out and positioning any kind of critique of AI as being ableism or being like a panic from, like, middle class knowledge workers against other people being able to do the work.
Very well said. Yes, go ahead, Beatrice.
So I love the way you're putting things, and you're making it really hard for me. I mean, I said I'm going to stick to the positive side, so I'm just going to make a short comment, right? Talking about the politics of care and empowerment. What I'm working towards is to make the whole Gen AI innovations accessible by default so that we can open new voices. We can get creators that are disabled that usually look, Silicon Valley, they make a lot of stuff. They never think about disabled people. They never think about minorities. So what I'm going to stick to the positive side and say that we can work together towards making sure that everyone has a space, and then we can bring the hope for the future. Mia, please.
But let's keep moving on because we only have 10 minutes per category. The next one I want to talk about is accuracy and productivity. So this is productivity myth. We are told that if we use generative AI, like Hesi gave some great examples how it can help productivity. So I would love to give this back to Hesi and talk a little bit more along with Beatrice. Talk about like how you talked about some of automation and such. If you can just elaborate a little bit more on that. If not, we can keep moving forward. But then after that, I want to go back to Bhaskar. There are some issues, the productivity myth. I want you to talk about the productivity myth and also like the accuracy and reliability of these results. So that said, also let's not forget bias. So let's start accuracy and productivity. Over to you, Hesi, and then to Beatrice.
I actually am going to concede on this because it is not 100% accurate all the time. I will say that generative AI is very good at some things. At summarization, it's not good at predictability. It's still very much understanding what the next word could be. It is good at brainstorming, but I would say if we were to take a look at even text, let me see here. Like when I do transcripts, it sometimes even takes word for word transcripts and it will hallucinate and make conclusions or recommendations based on that. So you pretty much have to babysit it. So from an accuracy standpoint, I will concede it does not have that. But can I just add one thing? And it was just based on what Bhaskar had talked about earlier. And I think it's an overall statement about where we are at this time. And he talked about meeting this moment. These are extractive technologies, but it doesn't mean that we haven't seen this before. We've seen this with the internet in general. We know about the manipulative algorithms. We know that we've seen this in clothing. We've seen this in the making of iPhones and cars, etc. The reality is that we live in a society where capitalism rules, and that in order to make a profit, you need to have cost effectiveness, and cost effectiveness is the essence of what the ethical and extractive technologies are doing. And so when we talk about what do, we cannot abstain from using them, but I will say that we need to actually participate in order to make these systems more ethical and better.
Yeah.
So
Can I
that's
add one thing? Yeah.
sure.
I need to concede a point to Hesi, what you just said, like that's as commonly said, like I think it's become a cliche now, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, and we acknowledging that a lot of technologies can be extractive. And also if you think about, like you said, clothing, right? There was a time that child labor was perfectly legal and then it became illegal. So we are still in the transition of making these technologies more ethical. So I definitely have to concede that we have seen this in other industries, and this might still be a nascent stage. So that said, I'll hand it off to Beatrice.
To elaborate on what you just said, Mia, right now there's a lot of legislation moving forward both sides of the Atlantic, and mostly in Europe we're trying to regulate a lot of things. So maybe some of the use cases that we have right now are going to become illegal in the next months or in the next years. So going back to the points of accuracy, productivity, and how to use it from my lens of disability-led innovations, the first thing for accuracy is that most of the basis for Gen AI today was made as a disabled-led initiative. For example, sound and image recognition, OCRs, even electronic music. It was Stevie Wonder's and Kurzweil. It was a challenge they did if he could reproduce a grand piano, and he made it, right? So there's a lot of things that we've made for the solution of a barrier in society for people with disabilities. In that part, I think OCR is really, really accurate. If we try to describe, for example, if we talk about, for example, autistic folks, sometimes we use it also at work. I use it also for German to try to analyze an email and say, okay, tell me what is the tone? What is there something that I'm missing from the words because of the way they are written? So the Gen AI is trained on language, and everything that is related to language is quite good. It may not be trained scientifically in certain topics. For example, if I try to look for maturity assessment in accessibility, there's almost nothing. It just hallucinates and makes really amazing sound things. But that is the tool that goes with the professional. The tool is a good tool only if a professional who knows how to use the tool is using it. So it's the same. If you have a hammer and you know how to use the hammer, you can do a lot of good. And if you use the hammer without having any idea, you can do a lot of damage. So we need to remember that is a tool. So some other scenarios is, for example, let's say an autistic person is traveling, or a person with a phobia or fear. They can run scenarios and they can go through what can go wrong and brainstorm strategies and options to support those barriers, right? So, okay, if I'm going through the X-ray scan and they find one of my materials that I forgot to put in my bag, what are they gonna say? How can I respond? How can I, it can give you some strategies that you could work on. Of course, it does not, I'm trying to find the word and now it only comes in German, Ersatz. So it does not take away the lack of expertise from a psychologist, from a medical professional, but it can gives you some guidance and you can see if that works for you. That being said, for example, automation of mundane tasks. We at school, I have two small children, and we had some parents that were using ChatGPT to plan children's birthday. We're full time. We try to do the best with the resources we got. So it was like, okay, I'm going to this place. It gave the website of the place. The children are so old and we're going to have 3 hours. Please make me an agenda of what can we do to keep the kids entertained. So it was okay. You buy a teddy bear, you put in the hashtag, and it will get given some things to make it work. If you can make recipes with what's left in your fridge, right? So this can be a game changer also for working parents who don't have a lot of time and we need to make magic with the things that we have. About automation of repetitive tasks, for example, we can break up tasks into smaller, less overwhelming points. And I also even sometimes ask to provide realistic time estimates. I'm horrible at estimating times. 5 minutes can be 3 minutes, or they can be like 3 hours. Once I go in flow, I forget about time. Or when we talk about analyzing large data sets, right? The first thing is like very overwhelming, but we can use it to compare and combine possibilities for creativity. We can use it for task prioritization. And for example, talking about the breaking up big tasks in smaller chunks, cleaning, work projects. So it's okay, I have to do my spring cleaning. Oh my God, I have 3 rooms, 5 rooms, a big house with 15 rooms, and I don't know how many children. Please let me know where can I start and guide me through it, providing me positive support so that I can be motivated to do all these things that I hate so much, right? So those are some examples that we can make in a positive way.
That is amazing. So many amazing examples. Just 2 things before I hand it over to Bhaskar. One is you mentioned analysis. The sentiment analysis can be very problematic. And I'll say this, there's one issue with that, which is about it can be used to tone police. I've had that experience recently. Women of color, Black women, especially, are very subject to tone policing. And the second thing is also when you mentioned about one of the use cases I can definitely get behind is like when you look in the fridge and give it all of the ingredients you have, like, and it spits out menus. Oh my gosh, I could totally use that for recipe planning, but that's it. That's the only place I concede. But I don't know. I do know of ChatGPT or one of the generative AI tools gave out the recipe for mustard gas. And that's a no-no. Okay, so I don't trust everything that this generative AI puts out there. But I'm going to hand it over to Bhaskar because he knows exactly what these tools can do and what the issues are. So over to you.
Did Beatrice want to say something? I just wanted to start by, again, maybe this is the flavor of multiple people said conceding, and I think I should also start by conceding one thing, which is that I do, like, don't get me wrong, I do actually think that these tools can be boost people's individual productivity, and in some cases can actually even be joyful experiences for people, right? And sorry, Mia, I'm not trying to betray you by saying this, but I think this is where it is the challenge, right? To reconcile the kind of what it does for an individual and then what it is doing at a systemic level. So at an individual level, these tools can help you to do actually not just like, do things quicker, but could potentially help you in brainstorming, could help you to actually like, I absolutely believe creatives can use these tools to do things that we can just haven't even imagined yet, right? But I think the question then again, from a systemic perspective, still comes down to this. Given that we are living in a capitalist system, one of the very likely outcomes of what this is going to do is going to change the nature of many, many different jobs, from writing, from like, coding, and so on and so forth, where you're actually not just making, it's not like, I use this example in a recent blog post that I wrote, where, I was using the example of a horse carriage. And you typically think about technology and automating the carriage so that the guy from driving the horse carriages might be now driving an automobile, right? But there is this very interesting thing about machine learning and AI in terms of how it is trying to learn from the data, but it is not really trying to automate the horse carriage. It's actually putting an automated robot that is trying to predict what would the driver do and still giving the harness back to the driver. What this means in practice is people who used to enjoy writing, who used to enjoy coding, they are actually changing the nature of the work and distancing themselves from the craft in the notion of productivity gain. And when we talk about productivity gain, there will be some productivity gain, but there are two things to consider. Whenever there is a productivity gain, who gets to keep the surplus? It's almost never going to be the employee, right? It is always going to go to the employer. And now if you can finish your work, let's say you take a third of the time, then now you have to work 3 times more to be compensated the same amount. And this is where one of the things that's particularly scary for me is that it doesn't even depend on what is the productivity gain you get. It is the AI narrative, what you have convinced people how productive this is, right? You might generate an article by prompting GPT or whichever your favorite LLM, and then spend an equal amount of time to correct it and make it your voice as much as you would have spent to write it from scratch, right? But that is never going to matter. What is going to matter is you're not writing anymore. So why would we pay you the same? So it's a productivity myth that now actually expects the employee to take that. And of course, if something goes wrong, now you write a news article and there are inaccuracies, it is who's going to be responsible, not the person at the top who enforced the use of these tools. It's the person who has written in. And in this case, it effectively, they become the moral crumple zone. So when the machine goes wrong, the blame comes to the employee. We also talked about accuracy. I'm not going to go too much in details of that, but as an information retrieval researcher, I would say I actually am not a fan of the hallucination framework, because hallucination assumes that these things are out of an error. Whereas large language models are next word, next token prediction systems, there is no reason to believe that they will produce exact knowledge on which it has been trained. But what to me is a more important thing, instead of looking at the inaccuracy, is we are basically inserting, especially in kind of information access context, we are inserting these tools between the actual knowledge artifacts and the person. Right. So what we were taught, if you go and do online search, you look at the document, you look at the context of the document, you look at so many other things in the context to understand both whether this is an authoritative source and also how to interpret. Whereas all of those things now we are effectively normalizing outsourcing to the machine. And that I think has a much bigger concern than just inaccuracies in the output, which you can always argue that as the system gets matures, it might get fixed as an error. But I think there's a much bigger societal aspect in the changing of the role.
So we will have a section about society and the impact of humans and such. And I love how you're bringing it back to that, because we are talking about individual use. Because what people are grappling with, what I and Hesi were grappling with, is pretty much what is our responsibility in using these technologies versus being the leader of these organizations, what is our responsibility as an organization? We are talking about policy, like we have a policy, we don't use generative AI in any of our work, we hire humans and so on. So that's the stance we have taken. But now that I'm hearing other organizations, how they're using, I think organizationally, individually, people are trying to make these decisions. And I feel like you all are providing really great insight into the conversation. So appreciate that. So first Beatrice and then Hesse.
I want to go back to your tone police example, and I'm going to turn it around on the positive side. So one thing I'm doing in our company from the tone police point, I'm making all my developers feed our inclusive language guidelines to all the development that we're doing. So I'm tone policing that they don't use any ableistic, sexistic, and any other istic language in the outputs of the Gen AI, right? So all the things can be sometimes used from one side or the other, and the changing the nature of jobs, if you know how to use the Gen AI right, and you learn and you adapt, you can, I mean, I come from Europe, right? So we have a lot more PTO days off, and we have paid healthcare, and we have some other social security issues. And the idea, for example, in Germany, we must have 5-minute paid breaks every hour, and we have some certain work regulations. So I know I'm talking from privilege, right? So those things, in theory, they can be, there's studies that say that working less hours make better productivity. So it's one of the things would be to push against the 1% to make these scientific studies count and be listened to. It's like the same thing from working from home or working remotely or working in the office in presence. So all these things is like there's a little group of people pushing for their interests and not respecting the science and the interests of the minority groups. Thank you.
Thanks, Beatrice. One thing I do want to respond to from Bashir's note, what was this idea of hallucination, but even from the perspective that it's even though I argued for productivity, there is definitely a time suck when you have to edit the output. But I ran across a recent article, which I totally agree with. It was yesterday, and there was someone on Substack named Merrick Cole, and he wrote this article called The 80% Mistake. Creation got cheaper and curation became priceless. Because like what he said, this was an interesting point. He said, curating AI content isn't editing, it's diamond grading and finding the flaws in what looks flawless. So he agrees that Gen AI doesn't make typos, it makes confident nonsense. And so what you're essentially doing is trying to edit all that fiction into something that's actually humanly plausible. So, from that perspective, you may spend, let's say, 10 minutes prompting, but you may end up using 3 hours to actually sculpt it. So even though it provides maybe a seed that you could use, maybe 90% of it is wrong, you can take that seed and actually edit it and refine it into something that you probably never would have gotten had you not done that initial prompt. So like from that perspective, I think suddenly we're not replacing ourselves, we're actually making ourselves better.
Okay, so I be honest, I have written a 3-part series on hallucinations, so I do have to jump in again, and it is on our blog post. And the reason I did it because I'm fascinated by just this notion of how these large language models can generative AI just creates these fabrications, right? Like and without going into the technical aspects of how those are created, it has real world implications. So what I'm going to do is I will just mention 2 things, and then we'll jump into the accessibility, security, and safety piece, because that's critical, and we are running out of time. So one is hallucinations are not just a coding issue. The fabrications are not just the issue, which is like you can correct. The problem is once somebody is accused, this is a real world example, someone was accused of a horrific crime. And that then, because that becomes fact, because somebody looked at it in ChatGPT, and ChatGPT, the sycophancy effect, right, where it's trying to please, it will put out any information, whether it's good, bad, like true or false. It doesn't care. It doesn't have that context. So for someone who's accused of a crime, it can be life-changing in a very devastating way. And the second is in civil or criminal court, in court cases, lawyers who are using it are they're using cases that don't exist. The problem with that is downstream, when those cases then become matter of public record, say you missed it, now it's part of public record. There's no diligence done on it. Somebody is building the case based on that because it's already done. So it's like this ripple effect, which is not going to end well. So that said, I'll pause there, but I do want to go back to Bhaskar again. Beatrice and Hesse did a really good job of laying out what are the different ways that AI can help accessibility. Beatrice did an amazing job, like laying out, example by example, how it can be used. So can you talk to us about like 3 things here? One is the privacy, as these models are built, the privacy issues, like they are being hacked, they can be hacked. The second is slop squatting, which is a new phrase I heard as I was researching, is that typos that can be, redirection of website just based on typos, right? You can redirect somebody to a fake site. Just maybe you replace an I with a, in the web address, you can just replace one letter. It goes to a different place. But you can use it in AI as well to mislead people. And last but not the least, many security experts are warning that we don't know what's in the code that's being generated. It could be maliciousware, it could be malware. So given your technical background, and could you just talk about what are some issues that we are facing there?
I want to start by first of all saying, I think the use cases that we've talked about in the context of accessibility are really, really important, right? And I actually am not even going to argue against it. In that context, the only thing I'm going to say is it again, kind of the same kind of individual versus collective question is that, even if these technologies help with accessibility today, but ends up commodifying, let's say, a whole profession altogether, then in the long term, everybody loses, right? And this is where, again, we should not be going around and shaming individual people or anything. It is really about figuring out, okay, what is the alternative that we are proposing if we are asking them? On the security stuff, to be honest, I'm a slightly bit more optimistic. I do think these problems that you're mentioning are very serious today, but it is also, I think, an artifact of a huge shift in the culture in tech about kind of playing fast and loose with everything, which honestly, I think, there are better ways of doing this. And in fact, if you look at even through big tech, some of the more older big tech companies do have a very different culture, even though you could argue that that is shifting. But where these kind of things, for example, what goes in your training data, what kind of code it is generating, and actually having processes to kind of critique that or catch any vulnerabilities. These are technical problems that we can make progress towards, right? The important thing here is going to be there are 10,000 different problems to go after. Which are the ones that these companies are actually incentivized to go after? It is going to be the one that doesn't affect the bottom line. But if on the way we have 10% cases of something happening to individuals who are not powerful in society, that's probably not going to get any, they're not going to work on it unless there's a strong enough pushback from society. But the last thing I would also add here, to be honest, is when we talk about security and safety in AI, I'm actually particularly concerned about the securitization of some of the narratives of AI ethics and responsible AI. Because one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of the security privacy conversation is really about, when the bad actor is out there in the platform trying to manipulate something. It is always a country that is not an ally with, let's say, the West. But it is never about the fact that, hey, what is the security and safety if all our information gets centralized control? And then we are seeing governments, authoritarian governments coming and talking about anti-woke AI executive orders, right? And so, and yesterday, or actually this morning, I think I saw an article about US military looking for machine learning engineers to generate propaganda to counter contradictory opinions, right? So it cuts both ways. And in that context, the thing that I think is really important to develop is the social infrastructure in parallel to the technical infrastructure. You can have, for example, Beatrice, you talked about, using these models to actually tone police in a good way. And that can happen, right? But to that means we need to then have also the social infrastructure to make a collective decision of what affects everybody. If you don't do that and you only keep building the tech, that's where my concerns come in.
Oof, so much.
Bravo, bravo.
Don't
I
talk.
loved it, how you tied everything together. Absolutely incredible. Can I just say we have 7 minutes, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to jump to the most critical piece. I swear, this is a huge conversation, so we could go on for another 2 hours, but let me just jump to the last one, and maybe we can skip Q&A. Sorry, folks, we won't have time to get to that. But let's talk about human and society. And you've alluded to that, Bhaskar, a little bit. But I would like to start with Beatrice. If you can talk about more human and society, the positive impact. Some of them you've talked about, the fact that it fills a gap sometimes in essential services. It can be consistent in responses, always available. What other ways do you feel like it can benefit humans in society?
So the first thing I'm going to do, I had it prepared for the previous, so I put one link in the chat. So this is the Accessible Canada Guidelines for Artificial Intelligence. So there is one chart on determining statistical discrimination. So first of all, we need to be aware that if there is not enough training data on minorities, if there's less than 50%, we should use with care. If there's less than 30%, we should not use it at all. So all these things, it also relates back to society. That's why it's so important to make sure that all the new technologies are accessible by default. Because if we don't have different divergent thinking, if we don't have different points of view, different lived experience, it's not going to happen. We need to be realistic. I need to be realistic and give this back. So if there's only the 1% developing, we're out. We lost the battle. I think that's why it's so important. All these open source initiatives for Gen AI that are happening across the globe. There's a lot of focus in Europe, like the Computer Chaos Club, and there's a lot of organizations that are pushing towards the common good and giving power to the people, because this is how I see this technology. I see it as a technology for the people. So I don't know, I'm traveling with my kids in the stroller or with a suitcase for a business travel, and I can ask the Gen AI to make a path where I know there's not going to be any broken elevators, there's not going to be any escalators that are broken, and I need to then lose my flight because I didn't make the connection on time. I can, we talk about sign language. There's a lot of deaf people. There is sadly not enough deaf interpreters out there. There is not enough sign language interpreters that are hearing or deaf. So in this case, there's a lot of efforts for many years trying to get avatars to work. And this is a very debated situation, but the technology is getting to a point what is making it easier. To give the point back to Bhaskar, of course, if we're in a court or if we're in a medical situation, give me the human. I don't want to deal with the machine, right? One thing what I'm also we need to follow people who are pushing for these type of things. There is a lot of initiatives. For example, Jonna Welker or Susan Scott Parker. Jonna Welker is doing a lot of policy on Gen AI and general AI that considers disability aspects, because sometimes we talk about AI ethics, but disability is always forgotten. So women inclusion is usually more up to date because we're 50% of the population, and sometimes disability is also forgotten. And for example, Susan Scott Parker, she's got an initiative talking about how use of Gen AI in HR can break the access to work for many people. So if there's gaps on your CV and if there's other things that if we can just train the AI better so that these things do not happen, right? So the way I see it, there's a lot of risks. Yes, I give you that, but we need to address that from the beginning and we need to cooperate. So the way I see it is that these Gen AI tools can be a let's get together opportunity that we need to use.
I would say that definitely it feels like we are separated by the tech company, but we are united as society, as individuals to make this better. Just a plug here, we host these events like every month. And there's one that we hosted this morning. We have a new segment on AI and enterprise where we are looking at how can we nudge enterprises, governments, large organizations towards more, because it brings some balance to the power, right? It can't just all be big tech dictating what they're doing. Let's also look at enterprises who are buying and procuring these systems. So the recording will be up. We talked to Marve Hickok, who talked about what are the, how do we make sure that we are demanding the guardrails. We are demanding that these technologies be created more accessibly, and so thank you so much for that, Beatrice. So we continue on. We have last few minutes. Maybe we can close with you, Hesi. I'll give it to Bhaskar first. I do want to ask you, Bhaskar, what do you feel about humans as society? My concerns are manipulation of the most vulnerable is contributing to the isolationism, and also impact on environment and the natural resources. What's on your mind? What else are you thinking about?
Right. So I'll try to keep this short because of the time here, and also because I've kind of, I think, even through the previous topic, I was kind of focusing broadly on kind of the society level and humanity level. I do think one of the things that we need to be really also think through here is how the positives and the negatives lands disproportionately depends on who you are and where you are, right? In fact, one of the things that is really troubling to me is that a lot of the benefits versus the labor is exactly lines up with the kind of global north, global south, the kind of colonial lines as we've seen in history. But I have already talked about that. And sorry, actually, in that context, it is important you mentioned about climate impact. I think that's another thing which is also very personal to me. My parents still live in Kolkata, and they are starting to experience regularly on every year there are a few days that the temperature goes above 50 degrees Celsius now. And this is the kind of thing, right? Like when these impacts starts happening, it first starts impacting the marginalized people. But I did want to actually finish on a positive note, right? So I worked 2 decades in big tech, and I continue to be working in tech because I actually love technology. I believe in the power, the emancipatory, liberatory power of technologies, right? And what I really would want to do is to actually take back technology from these very narrow ways of building them towards kind of profit, towards concentrating power. And I think a lot of people have pointed this out, that we have a crisis of imagination. AI or any other technology doesn't have to be this way. You can have AI or any other technologies built that is informed by the goals of decolonization and pulling down patriarchy and for disability justice and for all of those things. And we really should step out and take that freedom to imagine a very different futures for ourselves, and think about the technology that we want to build in that. So I will end with that call for us to kind of come together. And as you said, it is society together against maybe the powers that be. So
well said. Oh, Hesi, I'll give you the last minute to wrap this up.
Thank you. I do want to go into just a tight use case about society and the benefits. And we taught you, Mia, you already brought up the idea that it really hurts the most vulnerable. But I will also argue for the other point is that for the most vulnerable, sometimes these chatbots, these generative AI companions can be the most empathetic tools and or friends for some of these individuals. And especially those who are very isolated and lonely, they don't have anyone else. And I encourage everybody to look at a restricted community called My Boyfriend is AI on Reddit. And it's sad, but what it is, it's a very thoughtful community that actually talks openly about their boyfriends and their girlfriends that are AI and what they do for them emotionally. And sometimes that could be the difference between living and dying. And so I think we have to look at it on a case-by-case basis and understand that some people really need it. And in other cases, they may be harmed by it. But from that perspective, there are some positive benefits for those who can be the most vulnerable.
Thank you so much. This was such a fantastic conversation. I learned so much, and I do appreciate so much again, Beatrice, for joining us, sharing your views, and it just opened my eyes, at least, and I'm sure for the audience as well, to understand like what are the nuances, what are the use cases that we should care about, the use cases that matter, and what the future looks like. And it can be very inclusive and accessible. So thank you, Beatrice, for joining us. Bhaskar, such a pleasure. You are on mute, but again, it's such a great closing. Appreciate you. And Hesi,